join them. Appendix. Resources for readers. Research about self-deception in organizations. As we discuss in Leadership and Self-Deception is the most debilitating of organizational issues. This is so because problems can't be solved if those responsible for the problems remain resistant to the possibility that they may be at fault. We share a somewhat humorous yet troubling example of this issue in our book, The Outward Mindset. The story seems particularly relevant here, as it's about the man who was the inspiration for the Lou character in Leadership and Self-Deception. His name was Jack Hawk. Jack Hawk was the founder and longtime CEO of a company called Tubular Steel, a St. Louis-based national distributor of steel and carbon products. Years ago, Tubular had engaged one of the world's best-known consultants to help it overcome the toxic infighting that plagued the senior management team and stymied the growth of the entire company. After months of trying one approach after another without success, Jack asked this consultant if he knew of any other approach the company could try. The consultant was acquainted with Harbinger's work and recommended that Jack explore our ideas. During our first meeting with Jack and his team, we focused on helping each executive team member reassess his or her contribution to the challenges the company faced by carefully considering the following statement. As far as I'm concerned, the problem is me. Jack was eager to solve his company's problems, and he saw real promise in this approach. However, he remained blind to see how he was failing to apply our work to himself. At the end of the first day with his team, feeling energized by the headway he thought they were making, he stood up to reaffirm his commitment to the effort. I want you all to get the message, he said. I'm going to have posters made up and put up all over the building. Then, pointing his finger at the assembled executives and officers, he said, Don't forget, as far as you're concerned, the problem is you. You can imagine the reaction of his team members. In the very moment Jack thought he had gotten the point, he had completely missed it. This blindness to personal responsibility is the problem of self-deception. Jack gradually was able to overcome this blindness and began to see more straightforwardly and clearly. As a result, his company completely turned around, even in the face of a difficult economy in which the market for its products was collapsing. Over a 3-year period, the market size for Tubular Steel's products had shrunk from 10 million tons to 6 million tons. But the company grew its revenue over that same period from $30 million to $100 million. Tubular Steel was able to achieve this growth only because the team members were able to evaluate, quantify, and address the problem of self-deception that had been holding them back. Our research has revealed an interesting way to assess the level of self-deception in an organization. For years, we've had participants in our workshops anonymously rate their own and their organization's mindsets on a continuum from 1 to 10, from what we call entirely inward to entirely outward. An inward mindset equates to being in the box, and an outward mindset to being out of the box. Interestingly, people rate themselves much higher on this continuum, that is, much more outward than they rate their organizations. We find it interesting as well that this result surprises almost nobody. People nearly universally expect that they and the others will rate themselves more highly than they will rate their employer organizations. Why is this? Why do people think more highly of themselves than they do of their organizations? And why does everybody know this is how everybody thinks? The math, of course, doesn't work. A company that truly deserves a rating of 4 out of 10 on a mindset continuum, for example, can't be populated by people who, on average, have a rating of 8. When we point this out, people tend to laugh nervously, again, almost universally. The difference between how we rate ourselves and how we rate others is what we call the self-deception gap. Self-deception is what explains this inflated view of ourselves relative to others. Our research shows that people intuitively know of the problem of self-deception. They know of it not primarily because they recognize it in themselves, but because they observe in others the tendency to overinflate performance relative to results, and they observe how people explain this difference by blaming others for problems, rather than taking responsibility themselves. An interesting aspect of self-deception is that people who observe and recognize these behaviors in others are no less likely than others to do the same things themselves. However, they believe their own self-assessments are more accurate than the overinflated self-assessments of their colleagues. Like Jack Hawk earlier on at Tubular Steel, or Lou Herbert, they see the problem. They just don't see it in themselves. This nearly universal self-deception gap is reaffirmed in formal assessments we administer with our client organizations. A 20-question survey instrument called the Harbinger Mindset Assessment measures in a more detailed way where respondents rate their organization's mindset and where they rate their own. The Mindset Assessment asks questions that measure characteristics such as awareness, helpfulness, accountability, alignment, collaboration, self-correction, coordination, inclusivity, generosity, transparency, results focus, openness, appreciation, recognition, empowerment, initiative, engagement, and safety. Looking at these various elements and averaging results across industries, we have found that people rate their colleagues in their organizations at an average of 4.8 on the continuum, and themselves at 6.8, which is to say that individuals rate themselves as 40% better than the rest of the people in their organizations across these characteristics. The self-deception gap between respondents' self-views as compared to their views of others narrows with respect to one of the characteristics in the mindset assessment. In our experience, this characteristic is the single biggest indicator of mindset in an organization. We call this characteristic horizontal alignment. It's a measure of the extent of understanding people have about the objectives, needs, and challenges of those lateral to them in their organizations. The reason why horizontal alignment is such a helpful indicator of mindset is that a hyperactive self-interest, which is what drives someone who is in the box or who has an inward mindset, doesn't incentivize a person to build awareness about the objectives, needs, and challenges of his or her lateral coworkers. Self-interest may well drive someone to learn about the objectives, needs, and challenges of his or her boss. But an inward mindset orientation won't invite the same effort toward people situated horizontally from oneself in an organization. From the perspective of an inward mindset, that kind of effort doesn't seem to be relevant and seems unlikely to make much of a personal difference. The inward mindset perspective is wrong on both counts, but the blindness perpetuated by that mindset obscures reality. Interestingly, people score their own and their organization's horizontal alignment lower than any other characteristic in the assessment. The self-deception gap still exists for this element, but that gap is 50% smaller than for other elements. This result indicates something quite important. Horizontal alignment is so poor in most organizations that even when suffering from self-deception, people find it hard to obscure the fact that they themselves aren't very good at it. Accordingly, efforts to increase horizontal awareness within and across teams is a key strategy, both for helping people become aware of the inwardness that has characterized an organization and for helping individuals, teams, and entire organizations break free from the box. This is such an important strategy that Arbinger equips clients with a number of tools to help them increase horizontal awareness and alignment in their organizations and reduce the competing objectives and silos that are characteristics of organizations with poor horizontal awareness. How to measure the self-deception gap with the Arbinger Mindset Assessment. The Arbinger Mindset Assessment described above is available for your use. You may take the assessment free of charge at www.arbinger.com. It's a 20-question instrument that should take you less than 5 minutes to complete. You'll receive an automated analysis of your and your organization's mindsets based on your answers. If you wish to get data on a team, department, or entire organization, Arbinger can grant you access to the group-level instrument, which will yield a group-level assessment that will include, among other data points, a measure of the self-deception gap in the organization. Contact Arbinger to set up a group-level assessment. From way of being change to mindset change. In leadership and self-deception, we describe two completely different life experiences: a self-deceived, in-the-box experience and an unself-deceived, out-of-the-box experience. From reading the book, you know that one of the key differences between these two experiences of life is the way we see and experience other people. When we're in the box, we experience others not as people with their own lives, but as objects within our lives. When we experience others in these two ways, we experience ourselves differently as well. The choice to see another as either a person or an object is a choice between whether we will see and experience ourselves and others truthfully or erroneously. One's experiences of oneself and others are so radically different between these two ways that philosophers call them different ways of being. The choice to move from living in the box to living out of the box, or vice versa, amounts to a radical shift in one's way of being in the world, which is to say that it changes not only one's behavior, but also one's thoughts, emotions, interpretations of events, and views of the past, present, and future. In the years since Leadership and Self-Deception was first published, our work with clients has caused us to continue to refine the terms we use to make a rigorous, logical, philosophical work an equally powerful, practical one. We've discovered that clients are able to understand and apply the concepts we teach more easily if we characterize our work in terms of mindset change rather than way of being change. Perhaps this is because the term way of being, while accurately communicating the foundational depth of the issue we're taking on, also communicates a kind of gravity that seems difficult to change. The term mindset, while also carrying the idea of foundational change, sounds and feels inherently changeable, which it is. As part of this developmental process, a number of years ago we began talking in terms of changing mindset rather than changing way of being. Specifically, we began talking about helping individuals, teams, and organizations shift from inward mindset, in-the-box orientations, to outward mindset, out-of-the-box orientations. We soon learned how helpful it was to our clients to characterize the change we're seeking in this way. The ideas we share in this book still hold true nearly 20 years later. Terms like in the box and out of the box have entered the public lexicon and helped hundreds of thousands, even millions of people. The book's continued and increasing popularity, early on as a word-of-mouth phenomenon and now as one of the best-selling leadership books of all time, proves the timeless power of the ideas. As you encounter Arbinger's work in its most recent book, The Outward Mindset, the connections between the books will remain clear when you remember that the in-the-box way of being is what we now often call an inward mindset, and the out-of-box way of being is what we call an outward mindset. Our mission is to turn the world outward, one person, team, and organization at a time. How to use leadership and self-deception. We've been gratified and amazed at the range of uses that people have made of leadership and self-deception. Although it's styled as a book about business, readers have recognized that its foundational ideas apply to every aspect of life, from building a lasting marriage, for example, to raising children, and from driving organizational success to achieving personal fulfillment and happiness. Whether at work or at home, the applications are wide and various. It's been interesting to hear from readers about ways they're using the book. We have found that its many uses fall within 5 broad categories of human and organizational experience. The first of these areas of application is in hiring. Many organizations use the book as a vital part of their applicant screening and hiring process. They require potential hires to read the book, and then they use post-reading discussions with these applicants to evaluate key characteristics of success that are difficult to assess using normal hiring processes. A second broad area of application is what you might think of as leadership and team building. This application is pretty clear from the book itself, as the degree to which one is in the box toward others has huge implications about that person's ability to cooperate with and lead others. This is as true at home as it is at work. A third area of application is conflict resolution. If you think about it, the one thing every party in a conflict is sure of is that the conflict is someone else's fault. This means that there can be no lasting solution to a given conflict unless those who are responsible break through the blindness of self-deception and begin to consider their own culpability. This, too, is as true at home as it is at work. A fourth area of application is presented near the end of the book. The self-deception solution forms a foundation upon which organizations of all types can build robust systems of accountability and responsibility-taking. The reason for this is that once out of the box, people have no need to blame or to shirk responsibility. Getting out of the box, therefore, opens organizations to a level of disciplined initiative-taking that box-laden organizations can't achieve. A final area of application might broadly be called personal growth and development. Getting out of the box improves everything in life. For example, thoughts about others, feelings about oneself, hopes for the future, and the ability to make changes in the present. For these reasons, the book has become very popular among personal coaches, counselors, and therapists. In summary, then, the myriad ways in which people have used this book and its ideas fall within 5 broad areas of application. 1. Applicant screening and hiring. 2. Leadership and team building. 3. Conflict resolution. 4. Accountability transformation. And 5. Personal growth and development. Following, we discuss in more detail some specific uses people have been making of this book in each of these areas. Applicant screening and hiring. Many organizations utilize the book in their hiring practices. Prospective employees are required to read the book as part of the application process. Interviewers then emphasize the importance of the book's companion ideas of seeing others as people and focusing on results. They stress that making things more difficult for others and treating others as objects is not tolerated and will be grounds for termination. This establishes clear expectations even before a person is hired and helps to filter out individuals who are unwilling to commit to the out-of-box way of working. Here's what one of our client organizations wrote about the use of the book. We require all applicants to read and come prepared to discuss leadership and self-deception at the second interview. Specifically, we ask them to share what discoveries they made while reading the book. It helps us to more quickly assess the degree to which someone is willing to consider their contribution to problems they encounter in their work and with others, a key predictor of those who succeed in our company. Screening in this way has helped us achieve industry-leading low turnover among business unit leaders that has become one of our trademark competitive advantages. A careful reading of the book also helps us to better train leaders to recognize the signs and symptoms of resistant tendencies of potential new hires, which helps us to avoid costly new hires, defensiveness, inflated view of their own contribution to their success, blame, indulgence, etc. We take this so seriously that we provide what we consider ongoing graduate-level training on applied leadership and self-deception principles in hiring to ensure that our business unit leaders develop this crucial leadership competency. Leadership and team building. We've heard from companies too numerous to count how simply sharing leadership and self-deception with their workers has dramatically improved cooperation and teamwork across their organizations. Some of these organizations mandate or encourage all of their people to read the book, while others concentrate on managers of a certain rank. Some organizations follow up with formal and informal discussion groups where colleagues help each other to apply the ideas to their work situations. Many of these organizations also engage Harbinger's help, and we support their efforts with training and consultation around the leadership and team-building applications of our work. The results are dramatic. From line leaders to global CEOs, we frequently hear how the book has totally changed the way these leaders see themselves and interact with their teams. We've heard from many people, for example, about how their company's CEO or immediate supervisor has improved as dramatically as Lou improved in the book. One leader wrote, "We are not going into the box as often, and when we do get in the box, we come out much more quickly because we recognize the red flags and feelings that coincide with the box. Our meetings are less contentious, and people are more patient with each other. It's as if a kind of oil of sorts has flowed over all of us and lubricated the company, enabling us to be more honest about ourselves and more respectful of others." One company wrote to tell us that when they hire new business unit leaders, they engage them in a condensed version of Bud's encounters with Tom in the book. They, like the characters in Leadership and Self-Deception, affectionately call these Bud meetings. In these meetings, they teach their people, among other things, about the problem of self-deception and its impact on one's work, stress the need to be able to focus fully on results rather than on oneself and justification, and orient their people to the way they will be required to focus on results that's based on the teachings in the book. Uses of the book for team building and leadership purposes have not stopped at company doors, however. People who read the book for work typically bring it home and pass it around in their families as well. Couples and families often read the book together and apply their learning to their family situations. We often hear from people who say that their home lives have been greatly enriched by the book. At the risk of sounding overly dramatic, one executive reported that the book saved his son's life. Another who suffered from depression confided that it very likely saved his own. One executive shared the following after reading the book. "I'm afraid that my words won't convey the impact 3 hours of reading has just had on my life, my leadership, and my future. I have to tell you that there haven't been too many life-changing moments while I've been reading, but today I had one. This book is so compelling that I handed it to my wife when I came home and feel like I need to share it with my entire team. I'm going to have a book reading with my team and then get into a discussion about it. I'll probably need to read it a couple more times myself, though, as I'm sure I don't get it yet, just like Tom." We could go on, as the uses people have made of the book to build relationships and increase cooperation are nearly endless. When using the book in this way, however, we've learned an important tip. The book's title can seem accusing. For this reason, it's often helpful when giving the book to another to say something like, "Here's a book that will help you see how to deal with me when I'm really being a jerk." There's nothing accusing in that invitation. People will read it and learn whatever it is they're prepared to learn. Conflict resolution. The police department in one of the major cities in the United States has used the ideas in leadership and self-deception and its companion book, The Anatomy of Peace, to completely change the way they interact with the public in highly volatile situations. For example, when making a drug bust, their understanding of the importance of their way of being and seeing others as people has given them a means of quickly de-escalating tensions and restoring calm and order, minimizing trauma to innocent parties while quickly securing the cooperation of their targets. This approach combines the ideas regarding being out of the box from leadership and self-deception with the influence pyramid from The Anatomy of Peace. Once a door is broken in, for example, and the suspects are apprehended, the police officers immediately begin to attend to the needs of the suspects and others who might be on the scene. Do they need some water, for example, or do they need to use the restroom? Are they comfortable? Is there anything else the officers can do for them? And so on. They report that since they've begun focusing on seeing all the people they encounter, even suspects, as people, community complaints about police behavior have dropped essentially to zero. Although this approach may make for less dramatic TV than the public is accustomed to seeing, it's proved to make for far more effective law enforcement. Many judges in mediation situations are requiring the parties to read Leadership and Self-Deception, or The Anatomy of Peace, before proceeding with their mediations. We've heard many stories of parties who settled their differences on their own after reading one or both of these books. Even where this doesn't happen, the concepts in the books provide a common language and understanding that enables the mediation to proceed effectively. In addition, judges and mediators say that the books equip them to remain out of the box and therefore be more effective, even when the parties are tearing into each other and things are most difficult. These professionals have discovered that being out of the box is the quality that determines the helpfulness of every mediation skill they have ever learned. The book is used not only in mediations, but also more broadly within the legal justice system. One practitioner wrote, "Imagine using these concepts to help a client see that a problem previously viewed as insurmountable is actually amenable to a solution short of litigation. Or imagine using the ideas to help a client understand why a negotiation tanked, and to suggest a party-to-party approach that could get us back on track." As an example of this kind of application, after reading Leadership and Self-Deception, a company CEO called his counterpart at a supplier that his company was suing. He suggested that they meet and see if they could resolve their differences. Not only did they resolve their differences without going to court, but they agreed to keep doing business together. The book's utility in conflict situations is not limited to the legal justice system, of course. We frequently hear from people who say that their marriage was saved by their reading the book, for example, or that the book enabled them to resolve differences with a boss or colleague. A group of teachers at a school reported that their conflict-laden work environment was transformed into a culture of cooperation merely by having everyone read the book and then meet over a number of sessions to talk about what they've learned. Similarly, the leaders of a major U.S. corporation were able to resolve a costly labor management dispute after they and their counterparts at the union read the book. The reason Leadership and Self-Deception and The Anatomy of Peace have been so instrumental in helping people to resolve conflict is that they open readers to how they have helped to create the very problem they have attributed to others. This is the essence of the self-deception solution, discovering how each of us has the problem of not knowing that we have a problem. This is the realization that makes conflict resolution possible. Accountability transformation. Managers often use the book to help rehabilitate employees who will lose their jobs unless some serious changes are made. In many cases, the book has helped these employees to see problems they had never been able to see and to take the corrective steps necessary to save their careers. For example, a gentleman in his 50s had worked in the same company for nearly 3 decades. Although he was talented, interpersonal problems kept him from moving up in the company. As he was passed over for promotions year after year, he grew angry. Finally, a young man, a full generation younger, was promoted to be his boss, and the man's anger turned to rage. His former boss gave him a copy of Leadership and Self-Deception, in the hopes that the man would see himself clearly for perhaps the very first time. The man read the book twice. The first time through, he thought it naively ignored what to him was the dominant issue in most companies: politics. On the second reading, however, he started to open up to the possibility that he was at least partially responsible for his fate. He began asking some of his longtime colleagues for feedback about how he affected those around him. Unlike in the years past, he just listened without trying to defend himself. He was humbled by what he heard and began to hold himself accountable for issues he had always blamed on others. A position as a temporary supervisor of a historically low-performing team opened up. He asked for the opportunity to lead that group. His first day on the job, he told his team, "I can promise one thing to you. Every day I will try my hardest to see and treat you as people. You can count on that. If I don't, you come and let me know so I can change." The team broke production records the first month. The next month, they were the only team in the company to exceed their goals. They continued improving every month thereafter, and the man's peer supervisors wondered how it all had happened. What happened, of course, was that the man began holding himself accountable rather than waiting around for others to hold him accountable. And that single change changed everything. It's the transformation that leadership and self-deception invites. In this spirit, one CEO, after reading Leadership and Self-Deception, fired himself and hired a more able person to take his place. Another, instead of writing a blistering memo that would have made a whole division of his company into scapegoats, wrote an apology to his company for mistakes he himself had made that had set them up to fail. The company rallied behind him with new commitment and vigor. The book led another CEO to institute a new way of tackling problems in the company. Whereas before he would go to the person he thought was causing the problem and demand that the person fix it, the CEO began to consider how he himself might have contributed to the problem. He then convened a meeting including each person in the chain of command down to the level where the problem was manifest. He began the meeting by identifying the problem. He laid out all the ways he thought he had negatively contributed to the culture that had produced the problem, and proposed a plan to rectify his contributions to the problem. He invited the person directly below him to do the same thing, and so on down the line. By the time it got to the person most immediately responsible for the problem, that person publicly took responsibility for his contributions to the problem and then proposed a plan for what he would do about it. In this way, a problem that had gone on literally for years was solved nearly overnight, when the leaders stopped simply assigning responsibility and began holding themselves strictly accountable. This is now the model in that company for solving every problem encountered. This level of personal accountability in an organization should be every leader's dream. What our experience tells us, and what we're trying to communicate in this book, is that in order to move from merely dreaming about a culture of responsibility-taking and accountability to actually experiencing it, the accountability has to start with the leader, whether the leader is the CEO, a division VP, a line manager, or a parent. The most effective leaders lead in this single way, by holding themselves more accountable than all. Personal growth and development. Leadership and Self-Deception was discovered early on by prominent members of the professional and executive coaching professions. It's now a staple book for many coaching programs, as coaches find it to be a highly valuable tool in helping their clients with personal growth issues. The book is also widely used by therapists and counselors, as mental health practitioners find that the model connects with people in ways that significantly improve the effectiveness of their services. The book is used as a foundational text in many university and business school courses as well. Professors find that the ideas in the book provide an important foundation for many areas of study, from ethics to business management to organizational behavior to psychology. A prominent pharmacy school in the United States has all of its first-year students read the book for orientation. Faculty members then meet in 2-hour sessions with the students to discuss the concepts and their relevance to the profession. Another university offers Leadership and Self-Deception and the Anatomy of Peace, along with a supporting course, to all of its students as part of an effort to build community across cultures. A prominent law school utilizes Arbinger's books as the curriculum for a semester-long course on law and leadership. Many treatment programs supply a copy of the books to the family members of their clients in order to help those key caregivers to re-engage with their sons and daughters and other loved ones in more healthy and loving ways. We hear frequently from readers who engage with others around these materials. These engagements take many forms. In Japan, for example, out-of-the-box clubs in cities around the country provide a space where readers can help each other around these concepts. In the United States, initiatives on college campuses give students ways to gather and discuss these ideas. Arbinger offers a global community on the web as well, through its portals at arbinger.com, where readers and Arbinger practitioners from around the world can explore the theoretical and practical implications of the work. Those who want to take the next step can engage an Arbinger coach for personal help in applying leadership and self-deception in their daily and professional lives, or can engage Arbinger for team or organization-level change efforts. Services can be arranged through Arbinger's website or by calling Arbinger directly at 801-447-9244. In addition, public workshops are available in cities around the world. Longer advanced training also is available. Training options are detailed on Arbinger's website at www.arbinger.com. Introducing The Anatomy of Peace, world #1 bestseller in the categories of War and Peace and Conflict Resolution. Leadership and Self-Deception is one of the top 50 best-selling leadership books of all time. Its prequel, The Anatomy of Peace, has been #1 or 2 on the Amazon bestseller list in the War and Peace and Conflict Resolution categories for more than a decade. That means that every hour of every day for over 10 years, The Anatomy of Peace has been the best-selling book in its category. Very few books in history can make that claim. The Anatomy of Peace is the story of how Lou Herbert learned the ideas that ended up transforming his company by the time we encountered that company in Leadership and Self-Deception. Before his company transformed, Lou transformed, as did his family relationships, both with his wife Carol and with their son Corey. The Anatomy of Peace tells the story of how those transformations happened. The events in The Anatomy of Peace take place some 20 years prior to the events in Leadership and Self-Deception, just 2 weeks after 5 of Zagram's company executives, including Kate Stenerud, had quit. At that time of professional duress, Lou and Carol flew to Arizona to put Corey into a court-ordered treatment program. In their minds, it was a last-ditch effort to fix him. The treatment program was headed by a Palestinian and an Israeli in a business partnership. They were once bitter enemies, the historical divide between their peoples running down the center of their respective hearts. But they had overcome their histories and figured out how to help others overcome their divisions as well. As Lou and Carol came under the tutelage of these two men, they learned that Corey wasn't the only person who needed to make changes. Their marriage, their family culture, and Lou's company were all at risk for the same fundamental reason, because of the same reason that lies at the heart of all conflicts in the world, even the biggest conflict of all, centered in the Middle East. It turns out that people in conflict value something else more highly than they value solutions. The Anatomy of Peace shows what this is and demonstrates how conflicts at home, conflicts at work, and conflicts in the world stem from the same root cause. Furthermore, the book shows how we systematically misunderstand that cause and unwittingly perpetuate the very problems we think we're trying to solve. The book will launch you on a compelling and multi-layered journey of discovery into the foundational cause of conflict, misguided beliefs that perpetuate conflicts, and the way to resolve conflicts, large and small. The Anatomy of Peace has been instrumental in breaking down silos in organizations, transforming law enforcement methodologies and results, providing the framework for whole college conflict curriculums, healing labor management rifts, and saving marriages and other relationships. Business and governmental leaders, parents, professors, and conflict professionals alike use the book as a guide for finding solutions to their most challenging problems. An excerpt from The Outward Mindset. Leadership and Self-Deception and the Anatomy of Peace help people become aware of a problem they didn't know they had. They equipped readers to understand how they can leave the box and engage with others more collaboratively and productively. Arbinger's latest bestseller, The Outward Mindset, details how to implement and sustain that change across organizations. The following is Chapter 1 from The Outward Mindset. Chapter 1. A Different Approach. Two black cargo vans snaked down Wabash Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri. The passengers are members of the Kansas City Police Department, KCPD, SWAT team. They're about to serve a high-risk drug warrant, the fifth warrant service of that day. The targets of this warrant are sufficiently dangerous that the squad has obtained a no-knock warrant, meaning they will storm through the door unannounced. The men are dressed in black from head to toe, their faces covered by masks that leave only their eyes exposed. Bullet-resistant helmets and body armor make them an intimidating sight. Senior Sergeant Charles Chip Huth, leader of the 1910 SWAT squad for 8 years, is driving the lead van. He slows as the target residence comes into view, and his men stream from both vehicles as quietly and quickly as they can. 3 officers sprint around to the back of the house and take cover, supplying containment should the targets attempt to flee. 7 others, including Chip, run to the front door, 6 of them with their guns drawn. The 7th runs a well-used battering ram up to the door and slams it through. "Police!" they yell. "Everybody down!" Inside is bedlam. Men attempt to scramble out of the room, some to the stairs and others down hallways. Young children stand as if paralyzed, screaming. A number of women cower in terror on the floor, some of them shielding infants who are screaming at the top of their lungs. 2 of the men, the 2 suspects it turns out, go for their weapons, but are taken down by officers. "Don't even think about it," the officers shout. Then they pull the men's arms behind them and put them in cuffs. With all the young children, the scene in this home is more hectic than most, but within 5 minutes the 2 suspects lie face down on the living room floor, and the rest of the inhabitants have been gathered into the dining room. With everyone safely secured, the officers begin their search. They move with purpose and precision. Chip notices his point man, Bob Evans, leaving the room, and he assumes Bob is simply joining the search. A couple of minutes later, Chip passes the kitchen as he walks down the hall. Bob is standing at the kitchen sink. A moment earlier, Bob had been rifling through the kitchen cabinets looking for white powder. Not for contraband to be used as evidence against those they arrested, but for a white powder that was of much greater immediate importance. He was looking for Similac. With babies crying and their mothers understandably in hysterics, this most alpha male of the alpha males on Chip's squad was looking for a way to help them. When Chip sees him, Bob is mixing baby bottles. Bob looks at Chip with a faint smile and shrugs. He then picks up the bottles and begins distributing them to the mothers of the crying infants. Chip is delighted by this. He hadn't thought of baby bottles himself, but he completely understands what Bob is up to and why. This one act of responsiveness changed the entire scene. Everyone calmed down, and Chip and his men were able to explain the situation thoroughly, and then smoothly turn the two suspects over to the detectives. Nevertheless, mixing baby bottles was such an unusual and unpredictable act that many people in police work, including the members of this SWAT team just a few years earlier, would have considered it irrational. But in Chip's squad, this kind of responsiveness is routine. It wasn't always this way. To appreciate the remarkable transformation that had come to the 1910 SWAT team, we need to learn a little of Chip's challenging background and his history in the Kansas City Police Department. Chip was born in 1970, the son of an alcoholic, abusive career criminal and a bipolar schizophrenic mother. When Chip's father was around, the family usually was running from the law, moving from state to state around the South. When his father was absent, Chip, his siblings, and their mother often lived out of a car, collecting cans and cardboard for recycling as a way to survive. One time when his father returned, promising that things would be different, his abuse of the family escalated. Chip, aged 10 at the time, stood up to him, and this finally prompted Chip's mother to call the one person her husband feared, her ex-Special Forces brother, who came to wrest the family away from the man. "I'm here to get my sister and the kids," he told Chip's father. "If you get up off that couch, it's going to be the last thing you ever do." That was the last time Chip saw his father. Chip's father hated cops, which is the primary reason Chip became one. He joined KCPD in 1992. After 3 years as a parole officer, he was moved to a SWAT team. 4 years later, he joined the police academy as a use of force and firearms instructor. He was promoted to SWAT sergeant in 2004. The chief of police thought that the 1910 and 1920 SWAT squads, which act as the strong arm of the investigative bureau of the police department, were out of control. Chip came in as a hatchet man to fix them. What the chief may not have known, however, was that at that time, Chip was psychologically better to lead such a group than he was to change it. He made sure to outwork all his men so that he could kick their butts if necessary. Whenever he felt threatened, he responded with threats of violence, and he was just unstable enough that his team members were kept in line. He was even more severe with the public. The way he saw things, there really are bad guys in the world. He should know he grew up with one. And they need to be dealt with in a way that makes them sorry they ever committed a crime. Everyone the team members arrested, they took down hard, and they didn't much care how they treated people's property or pets. It wasn't uncommon for some of Chip's men to spit tobacco on suspects' furniture, for example, or to put a bullet through the skull of a potentially dangerous dog. Chip's squad was one of the most complained about units in the KCPD. Some of that was to be expected, since SWAT officers tend to do more damage than regular officers on the street. But even so, the rate of complaints against the squad was alarming, and the cost of the associated litigation was a drain on the department. Chip didn't see a problem with this. He believed his squad was working with people in the only way it could. In fact, he thought the more complaints he and the squad received, the more proof they had that they were doing something right. A couple of years after Chip took over the SWAT squad, another KCPD officer, Jack Colwell, helped Chip to see some truths about himself that startled him, about the person Chip had become and how his attitude and methods were actually undercutting his effectiveness and putting his men and their missions at risk. This revelation coincided with a double encounter Chip had with his 15-year-old son. Driving his son home from school one day, Chip could tell that something was on his mind and began asking question after question of his son, with no response. "Why won't you tell me what's bothering you?" Chip asked. "You wouldn't understand," his son responded. "Why?" Chip asked. Then his son gave Chip the answer that perhaps prepared him to hear what Jack had to say. "Because you're a robot, Dad." This comment cut deep. Chip began thinking about the kind of person he'd become. He had believed that suspicion and aggression were necessary for survival and success in a vicious, combative, and violent world. But now he started to see that being this kind of person did not put a stop to the viciousness and combat it. It actually accelerated it. These events started Chip on a journey of change, an endeavor that resulted in a complete transformation of the work of his squad. The team used to receive 2 to 3 complaints a month, many of them regarding excessive use of force. On average, these complaints cost the department $70,000 per incident. However, because of the team members' new way of working, they haven't had a complaint filed against them in 6 years. It's rare now that they leave others' personal property in shambles or shoot a dog. They even hired a dog specialist to teach them ways to control potentially dangerous animals. And they never spit tobacco. Chip told his men, "Unless you can tell me that chewing tobacco in people's homes advances the mission, we're not doing that anymore." And, of course, they prepare baby bottles. These changes have increased the cooperation Chip and his team receive from suspects and from the community, and the results have been astounding. In addition to shrinking community complaints against them to 0, in the first 3 years after adopting this approach, the 1910 SWAT squad recovered more illegal drugs and guns than it had in the previous decade. What transformed the team's approach and effectiveness? A different kind of mindset than the members had ever had before. A way of seeing and thinking that we call an outward mindset. Mark Bailiff and Paul Hubbard, co-CEOs of a highly respected healthcare company, have built their organization utilizing an outward mindset approach similar to the one Chip has used with his squad. A few years ago, they were meeting with the principals of a venerable private equity firm in New York City. With 32% and 30% compound annual growth rates in top-line revenue and profitability, respectively, over the prior 5 years, getting meetings like this one with potential capital investors hadn't been difficult for Mark and Paul. "So you've turned around over 50 healthcare facilities?" the firm's managing partner asked. Mark and Paul nodded. "How?" Mark and Paul looked at each other, waiting for the other to answer. "It all hinges on finding and developing the right leaders," Mark finally said. "And what's the most important qualifications you look for in a leader?" Mark and Paul felt as if they were being cross-examined. "Humility," Paul answered. "That's what distinguishes those who can turn these facilities around from those who can't. Leaders who succeed are those who are humble enough to be able to see beyond themselves and perceive the true capacities and capabilities of their people. They don't pretend to have all the answers. Rather, they create an environment that encourages their people to take on the primary responsibility for finding answers to the challenges they and their facilities face." The other members of the equity firm in the meeting looked at the managing partner, who sat poker-faced. "Humility?" he finally said, his tone condescending. "You're telling me that you've acquired 50 failing facilities and turned each of them around by finding leaders who have humility?" "Yes," Mark and Paul replied without hesitation. The managing partner stared at them for a moment. Then he pushed his chair back from a table and rose to his feet. "That doesn't compute to me." With little more than a handshake, he turned and strode out of the room, leaving behind a compelling investment opportunity in a company with a proven track record. What he couldn't comprehend was how the company's results depended on humble leaders who see beyond themselves, as Paul had described. Nearly 15 years earlier, Mark, Paul, and another early partner decided to try their hand at building their own company. They had less than 10 years of experience in healthcare between them, but they saw an opportunity to create a unique organization in an industry plagued with problems. So they began purchasing the clinically and financially beleaguered facilities their competitors were desperate to be rid of. They were convinced that the key missing ingredient in failing healthcare operations was not an absence of the right people or even the right location, but an absence of the right mindset. They engaged in a systematic approach to apply the principles that are presented in this book. Mark explains their experience this way. Some of our competition couldn't get rid of facilities and their teams fast enough because they thought the teams were simply defective. Our thesis was that we could take a poorly led and therefore underperforming facility, and by helping the existing team see what was possible, they could turn it around. As they acquired their first facilities, they encountered a pattern that would repeat itself, almost without exception, acquisition after acquisition. The outgoing leader, trying to do them a favor, would give them a list of the 5 or so staff members they would need to fire if they stood any chance of turning things around. We would thank them for the list and then go to work, Paul and Mark reminisced. Invariably, 4 of the 5 people would turn out to be our best performers. Consider what this demonstrates. Even if those who had been identified as problems could, when working under new leadership and a new approach, become star performers, then organizational improvement, even turnaround, is less a matter of getting the wrong people off the bus than a matter of helping people see. It's a matter of changing mindset. Leaders fail, Paul explains, by coming in saying, "Here's the vision. Now you go execute what I see." That's just wrong in our view of the world. Continuing, he says, although leaders should provide a mission or context and point toward what is possible, what humble, good leaders also do is to help people see. When people see, they are able to exercise all their human agency and initiative. When they do that, they own their work. When people are free to execute what they see, rather than simply to enact the instructions of the leader, they can change course in the moment to respond to ever-changing situation-specific needs. That kind of nimbleness and responsiveness is something you can't imagine, force, or orchestrate. Mark and Paul learned these lessons early on as they operated their first few facilities themselves. Reading situations attentively, they found themselves mixing plenty of baby bottles, taking responsibility to do whatever each situation required. As they acquired more facilities, they needed other leaders who could operate with an outward mindset, people who would mix baby bottles if necessary, and help others learn to do the same. This book is about how to help unlock this kind of collaboration, innovation, and responsiveness. How to experience a way of seeing, thinking, working, and leading that helps individuals, teams, and organizations significantly improve performance. At first, you might feel like the private equity firm leader who walked out of the meeting with Mark and Paul. The ideas we will cover may not make perfect sense to you early on, and you might wonder whether these concepts can help you with the challenges you're currently facing. We invite you to stay in the meeting. You will learn an actionable, repeatable, and scalable way to transform your personal, team, and organizational performance. Just as importantly, you'll begin to see situations outside of work differently as well. You'll see new and better ways to interact with those you care about most, including those you find most difficult. Everything in this book that applies to people and organizations applies to people in their home and family lives as well, and vice versa. This is why we include corporate, home, and individual stories. Lessons learned from each will apply across the board. Our journey begins with an idea that Chip, Mark, and Paul believe to be foundational. Mindset drives and shapes all that we do, how we engage with others, and how we behave in every moment and situation. This has been Leadership and Self-Deception, the 3rd edition, written by the Arbinger Institute, narrated by Steve Carlson. Copyright 2018 by the Arbinger Institute. Production copyright by the Arbinger Institute.